Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome back to Final Trade. It's the 2000 subscriber Q&A. I put out a couple of calls for questions, so here they are. Torgator asks, you only invest in sealed. Do you see any value in holding singles long term? So I do have about 500 near mint reserve list cards. I have some other unlimited and revised cards that are, better than just bulk commons, some rares and other things that I like from that era that I hold for the long term. I definitely think there's room there. I have some patrons who invest in nothing but old Magic cards. I have some who do it as a business for clients, things like that. I definitely think there's good potential there. I think for me personally and what I'm trying to grow this business into, sealed product kind of works in a way that is better with my long-term goals for Final Trade. So for you, that may not be the case. And I think that on the Pokemon side, there's a lot of potential there with old Pokemon cards. There's definitely a lot more nuance with those old cards because there were different printings of things and there's all kinds of variants with the old Pokemon stuff, and there's a lot more fraud there. But, if you just wanted to buy the cheapest near mint Mox Diamond off of TCG Player every month, that probably wouldn't be a bad long term investment strategy. And I think there's a lot of interesting spots in old Magic cards, weird kind of nuanced things like, for instance, was it Urza's Legacy was the first expansion with foil Magic cards, and then Urza's Destiny, maybe the very next set was the final expansion with Reserve List, or did Reserve List go through the Mercadian block? I forget. But basically, there was this very short period where the Reserve List was still being added to and foil cards were a thing. So there's something like 30 different Reserve List cards that can exist in a foil version. And that's a real interesting niche thing. Also, things like the 7th edition Shooting Star foils I think are very interesting because they were black border in a core set. So stuff like that I think has real potential long term. Always you want to be buying the best condition copy of the card you can find because that will accelerate its price faster over time than some copy of the card that's bent in half and your dog chewed on. Next, Johann Witt, 1854, asks, probably worth its own video. What are your plans for divesting? I'm dumping everything when I hit 60. So I definitely think you should not dump everything at once because if the market happens to be depressed at the time, it would significantly impact your overall long-term returns. My catastrophic plan for how to divest of all the sealed product, if Final Trade never really works out, if the patron program never really works out, if I never open a card store, if none of the visions for all of this that I have down the road ever come to fruition, and I'm simply an old man left with closets full of sealed product, the way I plan to get rid of it is pick 5 boxes, put them up on eBay at a buy now price, and wait for some of them to sell. And when one sells, I'll ship it and I'll replace it with another box, and I'll just do that slowly over years. And so the thing about that is if the market is down when you start, okay, you'll probably ride through waves up and down as you're divesting your collection and getting rid of it. And it's a very low stress, simple way to get rid of it over a long period of time. And the overall value of the collection will continue to go up and appreciate as you're doing that over a couple years. So, I've shown in some of my analyses, I think it was one of my Pokemon long-term box price analyses, that even if you took a 50% haircut, just selling the entire thing to Rudy all at once, your gains are still going to be pretty good. So I don't really worry all that much about how to get rid of it. I think just the slow way is easy enough. And especially if you're talking about waiting until you're 60, that's probably something you could do in your spare time without too much stress. So Nathan Youngblut 6888 asks, are there any books or written resources that you recommend as must-reads for aspiring collectors and evil investors who want to create an LLC as a vehicle for buying, selling, and holding our collectible assets? So I guess it's more about the creation of the business and that kind of administrative side. In the U.S., just speaking U.S.-centric, it varies so much state to state. The best thing I can tell you to do is go to your state's Secretary of State website, figure out what you need to do there to open an LLC. You'll have to register an account, get an email address, fill out some forms, come up with a name for your business, and then you'll go to your state comptroller's website after your LLC has been approved by the Secretary of State, You can get a sales tax permit or a resale permit. The names vary from state to state, but basically it's the sheet of paper that lets you buy stuff as a reseller without paying sales tax. Then you can go to a bank, get a business bank account, go to the IRS, get an employer ID number. All of this stuff will take probably 6 weeks start to finish. Some states it costs money, some more, some less. Some have recurring fees to maintain an LLC. Texas doesn't. Texas is pretty good. It costs about $300 to register an LLC, and then the rest doesn't cost anything up front. But then after you've gotten all of those things out of the way, you can start approaching sites like eBay, TCG Player, and a bunch of others that will take your sales tax and your LLC information and then put you on a sales tax free account so you can buy sales tax free. And that's how you get started with it. From there, you decide what you're going to invest in, what you're going to hold, how you're going to hold it, how long you're going to hold it, how you're going to get rid of it, all those other things. But from a standpoint of how to start, every state is so different that you need to just go to your own state's websites and figure out from there. Alpha Whale asked, does it still make sense to regularly allocate a portion of TCG funds to Flesh and Blood? I initially started to invest as a hedge against WotC and their remedial business practices. However, with high print runs and multiple new small market cap games competing for demand, FAB returns have been worse for me than both Pokemon and MTG. If I am taking on more risk, I should be expecting a higher yield. No? Congrats on 2K. Thank you. Yeah, I definitely think it's still worth buying Flesh and Blood. I still buy it. I think what you need to do is not fall into the fallacy of zooming in too close. And it's the straight line fallacy where an investor will look at a plot on too small of a timeline. They will forget their long-term theses. And they will say, well, this product has been sideways or it's been down for some period of time. And, maybe it's only a few weeks, maybe it's 6 months or a year or so. And then they'll conclude from that maybe this isn't worth it. And I think what you have to do is always think about your long-term theses. What are your ideas for the long-term future of the TCG markets in general, and the world in general, that will inform how you invest in everything, not just TCGs, but stock market and everything else. And so for me, with Flesh and Blood, the long-term thesis is it's a very well-managed game. It has, 10, 11, 12 expansions under its belt now, so it's not just going to spontaneously fail. It entered the market in a very tumultuous time. Welcome to Wraith Alpha released in late 2019, and then it navigated the pandemic, the whole 2021 boom and the 22 bust and everything else. It transitioned to Fab 2.0. It grew the player base incredibly. It has arguably the best competitive system of TCG play in the world right now. And so as a established, proven game, there's not that much downside risk. But I feel like there's still a lot of upside potential because, and, I'd be interested if LSS has an estimate on this, but, let's estimate that Flesh and Blood has a 5 or 8% TCG worldwide market share right now. Well, doubling that is not terribly difficult when you start from a 5 or 8% market share. Where if Wizards of the Coast wants to double Magic's market share, man, it's really got to come up with some revolutionary ideas to do it. Basically, LSS could double Flesh and Blood's market share by just continuing to execute well and taking a scalpel around the edges of the way they're doing things now. They don't need a wrecking ball down the center. So I would say don't be discouraged that over the last 12 months, Flesh and Blood took a big ride upwards and then basically gave it all back, and the prices are what they were at 12 months ago. I would say decide what you think the long-term theses for Flesh and Blood will be, the things that will most inform the asset's growth or decline in the long term, and figure out if those, for you, mean that you should keep investing in it and adding to your positions. For me, it definitely does. I think Flesh and Blood is in that really great spot where it's proven itself and it still has huge potential to grow. Spencer Chin 3154 says, successes and failures from your mini videos, investments, theories, other hustles. What are your top hits and misses, especially examples that would be helpful for folks wanting to do something similar? So, the best hit I've ever had in investing is simply allocating money from my paycheck to my 401k every paycheck and putting it into an S&P 500 index ETF and doing that for 20 plus years. Because if you just do that when you start your whatever job you have when you're in your 20s, and you do it consistently, you don't panic, you don't sell to protect what you have left, you don't do anything crazy emotional, you don't try to chase the next momentum stock or any of that, then by the time you get to your mid 30s, early 40s, what you'll realize is that in terms of your cohort of other people your age, you're in the top 5 to 10% of retirement savings. And it's really easy. It just takes being patient, just having a dumb plan and executing it consistently. And so that's been my biggest win, is that. Now, in terms of actively managed stock investing, things like that, the pandemic definitely had a lot of opportunity. I bought a lot of oil companies in late 2020. Those have more than tripled since then and are yielding really amazing dividends on top of that. In late 2020, I bought, basically, I had about $100,000 sitting in the brokerage account, and I bought Diageo stock with it. It's one of the large international liquor companies, along with Brown-Forman, Picard-Renault, and AB InBev, I think are the other three big ones. And basically, I looked around and I said, the bars and restaurants are closed from lockdowns, but eventually they will reopen and humans will never stop drinking. Alcohol stocks are the thing that go up in good times and they go up in bad times. And so I said, this is highly irrational that Diageo stock is so beaten down at this point. So I bought somewhere around $100,000 of it. I held it through that December dividend payment. It was like $1,700 or something like that. And then I sold it in like February of 2021, I think. And I made like a 20 or 25% return on that for those 3 months. And that was probably like my biggest dumb win. But essentially, it comes back to what I said on the question before, which is establish your long-term theses. Humans will never stop drinking. The lockdown will end. And so I put those together and I said, well, these liquor company stocks at some point are going to come back up. And I did not have any type of inclination that, this will happen within 3 or 4 months of me buying the stock. That was just dumb luck. But basically, if you're just patient, if you just come up with decent ideas that you think will stand the test of time, that have long-term future power on their side, then that's what you need to do. Another thing that I'll say is examples that are helpful. Warren Buffett is a mixed bag. He kind of missed out on tech in the early 2000s. He got into tech really late. For some reason, he's still fascinated with airlines, even though he has one of the best anti-airline investing quotes ever about how a time-traveling investor would have done everybody a favor by shooting down the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk. And he's a mixed bag, but one thing that I do truly think is insightful that he has said in the past is it's better to buy a great company at a good price than a good company at a great price. And that's something I've brought over into the TCG space, that, you look at some of these boxes of cards and you look at what's in them, you look at what the set is based around, the content, everything else, the engineering, the print runs, all of it. And sometimes you see those kind of things that you have conviction are the great asset at a good price. And definitely this year in 2023, Dominaria Remastered, in my opinion, was that. And in fact, it was a great asset at a great price, because for a lot of the year, the collector and the draft boxes both sold at lower prices than standard expansion collector and draft boxes. And so, in terms of taking those kind of lessons like Spencer is asking here, some of those famous investors can be useful if you can distill some of their best words of wisdom and figure out which ones are really valuable. And that's why I kind of give the caveat that Warren Buffett is a mixed bag. Some things he's been objectively wrong on in the past. Nervin 2004 says, do you sell cards online as a primary source of income, or is it just a hobby? If I have a few cards that I'm looking to sell, do you think it's worth setting up a store on TCG Player, or is it better to look for other ways to sell my cards? So the card sales, final trade, all of this, it is I would classify it as a hobby that I am attempting to turn into a full-time job, but I have a day job as an engineer that actually pays the bills. Final Trade is growing nicely, and I see a path over the horizon where it can grow into a full-time business at some point and pay my family's bills. I'm probably still a couple years off from that. I probably is even optimistic. I mean, I'm definitely still a couple years off of that. So, selling cards online is, yeah, I would say it's a hobby that I'm attempting to expand. Now, the second part of his question, he has a few cards that he's looking to sell. So it depends on what your definition of few is. Now, if you inherited a stack of Arabian Nights, what I would tell you is lay them all out on a table, take a high-def photo of them, put them on an auction on eBay, and get rid of them that way. If a few is 5,000 bulk cards from Magic that you just want to get rid of because your collection is too big, I would say go to TCG Player and list them there. So the bar is pretty low at which TCG Player becomes the best option to sell off your cards. eBay is a lot more difficult to list cards on, but there are cases where it's better to try to sell them there. So most of the time, TCG Player is going to be your answer. TTB Money says, I've got the best question of all. How many sealed boxes, draft, set, and collector of Crimson Vow do you currently have? So I looked back to answer this. I have 7 draft boxes. I have 5 collector boxes. I have 0 set boxes. And on top of that, I have 6 boxes of double feature, which is that mashed together Crimson Vow and Midnight Hunt product. So, all that Crimson Vow product is probably going to be dead for many, many years. Even though I'm not terribly underwater at it, I looked at my average price. My average collector box price for Crimson Vow was like $156. My average draft box price was like $86 or something like that. And my average price for double feature was like $166. So all 3 of those are currently underwater a bit. But I expect the Crimson Vow is going to take quite a while to come back up to above where I bought them at. Double feature, I think, and I've said this many times before, I think it's a great product and it's going to age very well. Now, TTB Money goes on to ask other question. Okay, now that's out of the way. Have you figured out a time frame for when you plan to open your LGS, if that's still in the works, of course? Yes, so I would like to. I don't really agree with kind of the crowd consensus that if you want to open a card store, you're an idiot. I think it's a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult business to run. It's incredibly capital intensive, but I think the downside of it is it attracts a lot of people who are very enthusiastic about cards. They love playing TCGs. They love reading comics and collecting comics and board games and things like that. And I think most of them are unsuccessful because they're undercapitalized. I think what you need is a business plan where you can weather a couple of years of market waves and hold product through those waves and sell it off later. And I think a lot of stores simply don't have the capitalization to do that. So if you want to open a card store, you need to have that as part of your business plan. You need to say, what are the games that I'm going to fully support in the store, like Magic and Pokemon and Flesh and Blood and maybe Sorcery and One Piece and Lorcana. And then what are the games that you're just going to kind of like token support? You'll have a few of the most current boxes on the shelf, and that's about it because, the player bases for them are not as big. They're not as popular of games. So things like your Digimons, your Dragon Balls, your Weiss, all those other ones that are kind of, games that just aren't as popular, but you need something on the shelf for the rare occasion when someone walks in. And so then you need to say, of those ones that you really want to support, how many products do they release every year? What kind of boxes within each expansion? How much do they cost at the distribution level? And you need to figure out, how much would this cost if I just wanted to lay out here from the start, what would I need to buy all the inventory that I plan to support for, say, 12, 18, 24 months? And that would be absolute worst case. And, it kind of makes a preposterous assumption that you would sell nothing. You would open this store full of inventory and nothing would sell, which is ludicrous. But you have to say, you need to be able to weather those waves in the TCG market when sales are bad, when products come out and they immediately tank in price. You need to be able to weather that as a card store. And so when I think about wanting to open an LGS eventually, yes, that's part of my business plan is how do I go in with the capitalization that would allow me to weather that kind of market peaks and valleys for multiple years. On top of that, I think I live in a really good place for opening a card store. I've looked around at the card stores that are in the wider area. There are a couple, and there's a college campus just a few minutes from my house that does not have a card store that services it. So I think that's a real opportunity. So TTB Money goes on. I've been following RNG Games per your recommendation, and man, does he make me want to open and not open an LGS. And yeah, Rob from RNG Games, he is very sincere and honest, and he really lays out everything of, here are the high points and here are the low points of running an LGS. And he had a whiteboard video a few months ago where he was just showing his overhead costs for his business at its scale. I think he's been in the store for, is it 2 or 3 years now? I forget it, maybe 3 years now. And, it's just, it was eye-opening that at his scale of operation, and he's expanded a lot since he opened, but he was talking about eventually it's $100,000 that he lays out in overhead for a year so that he can have a door unlocked for people to come in and sit at his tables and play games. And that doesn't even get into buying product and rotating inventory and all that other stuff. So yeah, Rob is very sobering if you want to see what the honest, non-aggrandized version of opening a card store and running it day to day is. I definitely recommend everybody watch him. TTB Money goes on. I would love to see how you would go about it. I don't really know that, I don't have any suggestions for Rob. Rob knows better how to run a card store than I do. He's been doing it for multiple years. And I certainly would not want to critique anything Rob is doing without first, asking him and making sure I'm not misunderstanding what he's doing. He says, thank you for your commitment in exposing TCG deals, etc. Much appreciated. Okay, so we'll move on. Blip Boy, who has had, I swear, several other names in the past because I recognize the avatar. He says, do you play at an LGS or have friends that play locally? How often does that happen? No, I do not play at an LGS. I play Pokemon with my kids. Probably once every week or two. I occasionally play pre-modern with my wife. I play other games. So as far as TCGs, no, I don't get nearly as much play as I'd like, but I have 3 small kids, and most evenings, by the time they get in bed, it's 7:30, 8 o'clock or so, and so I'd be leaving to go to an LGS at that point to begin playing, and like I said, I have a full-time professional job. What I would hope is that if I ever got to open an LGS, and I know this is probably fanciful thinking, Rob, let me know, but I would hope I'd get to play a bit more, though I suspect if I had an actual LGS, I would just be working there all the time anyway. So, I enjoy being tangent to the product, to the games, and getting to play sometimes. I do wish I got to play more. And I definitely want to get my kids into playing Dungeons and Dragons. My wife and I play occasionally, but I wanted to get them into that as they get a little older and they can start playing that. Same Blip Boy says, what do you miss most about just starting YouTube? Nothing. YouTube gets more enjoyable and more fun the longer you do it. The more videos you make, the more your audience grows, the more you start recognizing repeat posters, people that you kind of develop conversational relationships with. YouTube becomes more and more fun over time. And definitely something that I've really enjoyed as I've now run the YouTube channel for 2.5 years is those people who have been around for a long time that I've come to recognize, that I've come to somewhat characterize. You kind of learn from posts they make, what kind of person they are, what they're into, how they think. And then some of them are really, really insightful and really give you good feedback. And so building that audience has been really, really fun over time. And so I don't miss anything about early YouTube. Early YouTube is frustrating because you'll make a video and you'll put it out and you'll get 10 views and you'll get no comments. And so you're not really sure, am I doing something wrong? But there's no feedback. And so you're not sure if you're doing something wrong. Have you just failed to find your audience yet? You don't know. And so all of that's very frustrating at the beginning. And also, you're not quite completely sure what kind of content you want to make. Whereas at this point of doing Final Trade for a couple years now, I know exactly the kind of content I love to make. And so I produce that content, I put it out, and it's well received with some people, and I enjoy having their feedback and having them as an audience. And so yeah, there's nothing I miss about starting out YouTube. Jonah Baca, 6192 says, "What is the best way to explain to my girlfriend about why I spend money on cold foils and reserve list cards with the intent to see them go up?" Well, probably the best way to explain is it's my money and my business. But if you're going to be a little nicer than that, I guess one avenue you might pursue is trying to explain it in terms of collectible baseball cards, cards that over long periods of time have done well. You can point to some iconic baseball cards like the 52 Mickey Mantle, which is a very high print and valuable card. Things like, there's the Topps Jordan rookie. There's the 83 Griffey rookie card. There's a couple others that are just kind of iconic cards in sports card collecting, and explain that it's similar to that, except you kind of think this is a better deal because these are also games. So people consume these cards to play with, not just to collect. So that may be one avenue to do it. For me, I've been married for almost 20 years and I've done well in investing. And so my wife just kind of says, well, you have a track history of performance. And so she doesn't really worry about what I'm doing financially or investing in. She'll ask questions so that she understands. But then she kind of just takes an attitude of, well, you've worked out so far. So she'll just let me keep having free reign over financial decisions. Insane MTG says, in some contexts, Magic Sealed is not worth it anymore. Do you still invest heavily in pre-Eldraine booster boxes? Greetings from Mexico. Yes. So I know some of you guys in Mexico, I've heard that you have like really bad distribution. There's not as many stores. The games aren't as popular. And like it's a lot more expensive to play there. I'm in DFW and I always think I wish there was a way that like I could get cards to you guys so we could alleviate that. But okay, Sealed Magic not worth it anymore. I look at this question and I think of it in terms of all the various other investing I've done over the last 2 decades. And every time I heard statements like Sealed Magic is not worth it anymore when it comes to other assets, they're almost always wrong. And so I remember, a couple of them sometime in probably 2014, I read someone say, 556 will never be less than $1 a round again. And you know what? In 2018, I was buying it for 13 cents a round and it was, Lake City M193 surplus. And, in 2020, people were saying things like 2019 will have been the peak of human oil usage for all of history. And I looked at that and I thought, well, eventually lockdowns will end and people start going about life again and we'll start using a ton of oil again and populations will keep growing. And lo and behold, we've already set new records for peak oil usage. And on and on and on. I could go example after example after example. But over the long timeline, very few assets go to zero. And a lot of the time when people prognosticate doom in a market or for an asset, it's, again, that straight line fallacy. It's Magic has had a rough last 2.5 years, and people zoom in too closely on that. They forget their long-term theses, and they think this must be what it will be like forever. And so I disagree with that. I think Magic will be fine in the long term. I think WotC is making changes. They must make more changes, and those changes will come to fruition. And in 10 years, we'll look back at this, and surprising to hear now, will have forgotten how negative everyone was, how bad we thought it was right now. Do I still invest heavily in pre-Eldraine booster boxes? So Eldraine was actually right when I got into TCG investing. I do have a few boxes from before that, not many. I think there are some opportunities to buy into those. I suggested a few of those on Black Friday to my patrons, some War of the Spark and those last couple of sets in early 2020 and in 2019, because they were nearing the end of their life when all of the crazy high print runs and reprints were coming about in 2021. And so I feel like they were mostly safe from that, but also they've just kind of gotten lumped in with this latest era of Magic. And for the most part, those last few standard sets before and in early 2020, you can buy at nearly release prices. I mean, they're in like the 100, the 120s. And so I think those are ones that the market is underestimating right now and still represented very good deals when I looked at them on Black Friday. Now, I haven't looked at them again since. But yeah, I do absolutely think long term, sealed investing is still there. It's not going away. It's still going to be fine. And again, it comes back to the long-term theses. You always have to remember those and not give into the straight line fallacy and zooming too tightly in on a plot of prices. Absolution00 says, how do you go about storing and keeping track of all of your sealed product? I just use a spreadsheet. When I buy product, I add it to a spreadsheet, and then I have ways to track that, some tables that the spreadsheets generate that keep track of what I've opened for singles, what I've sold to patrons for box openings, what I've otherwise sold to friends, things like that. So right now, it's a real Mickey Mouse way of doing it. You know, if I ever did have a card store and I was moving much more product much more often, I would definitely need a better way of doing my inventory management. But for now, just a dumb spreadsheet works. And how do I store it? USPS medium flat rate boxes are really good for holding Magic, Draft, and set boxes. The discontinued USPS Region B boxes were really great for holding Flesh and Blood and Pokemon boxes. They didn't fit completely tightly on the Pokemon boxes, but they could hold 6 boxes with some space. They would hold 6 or 8 Flesh and Blood boxes, depending on which of the 2 size of boxes they were. And then I just label outside, put them up in closets. So I have them in closets, sprinkled all around the house. Madtown Hobby says, are Musk and Bezos' plans to launch tens of thousands of satellites going to doom humanity? So I believe what he's talking about is Kessler syndrome. It's an idea where when you get too many satellites in orbit, you can have a debris cascade where a piece of debris causes another satellite to break up. The debris from that breakup then triggers more breakups, and it cascades to where it breaks up most or all satellites in orbit, and basically creates an impenetrable shield of garbage that prevents new spacecraft from escaping the Earth for potentially several decades. When I worked at Johnson Space Center in the late 2000s, I actually went to a conference about satellite and orbital debris sometime probably 2008 or 2009. And in that time period, China did a anti-satellite missile test. And there was very rightly a lot of condemnation of the test because they were shooting a missile into orbit to blow up a satellite just to flex and prove that they could. But it was going to create a ton of debris, which is a hazard to orbit. Now, are Musk and Bezos' plans to launch all these satellites going to doom humanity? I don't know. We had a couple of other satellite-based internet systems before Elon Musk's Starlink. They operated at higher orbits. So the one, and I hesitate to call it an innovation because there are downsides to it, but the one innovation of Starlink is it operates at a much lower orbit. And so the reason that Starlink does that is so that the latency is lower because the signal does not have to travel all the way to geosynchronous orbit and back. So you get better latency. The downside is the orbits decay faster, and the big problem is it's not clear yet whether Starlink is going to be a profitable business. Now, I know that they said a few months ago, Elon said that Starlink is operationally profitable. Now, people rightly pointed out that what operationally profitable means is that once the satellites were in orbit, then trading bandwidth for monthly subscriptions was profitable. But the ongoing maintenance of the constellation, adding new satellites, building those satellites, building the rockets to launch them to orbit, the launch operations, the fuel costs, the R&D for future satellites, all those things are not accounted for in operational profitability. So saying that Starlink is operationally profitable kind of pretends that Santa Claus will continue to deliver new satellites into orbit at the correct inclinations and velocities every time it's needed without any more monetary capital input by SpaceX, which is kind of silly. So having said that it is operationally profitable was kind of obfuscating and intentionally confusing. Now, Bezos plans to do the same thing. Is it Kuiper, I think, is the name of his constellation he wants to put up? I interviewed at Blue Origin in April of 22, and I did a bunch of research into the company as I was about to do those rounds of interviews. And it seems that Bezos doesn't really have a good idea of what he's doing or what he wants to do. He's kind of satisfied with having been the richest person in the world. And even after his divorce, I think he's still like the third or fifth richest person in the world. And so he just doesn't have much ambition left, it seems. And Blue Origin has kind of squandered many years with what's turned out to be some bad designs in their overall launch architecture. So I could go on about that more, but no, I don't think those guys are going to doom humanity with their satellite constellations. I think ultimately the business models for satellite internet are somewhat natively limited. We have 5G that's expanding at an incredible pace and is incredibly capable. And if you happen to live outside of populated areas where 5G coverage is available, well, very few people live outside those areas. And even Starlink has had issues where they've had to sell their ground stations at huge losses just to get customers to then sign up for the monthly subscriptions. So I'm not convinced that it's a viable business model. And so far it's not. It's not a profitable business overall. It may be operationally profitable. If we kind of squint and pretend and mince words the correct way, we can say it's operationally profitable, but I don't think it's going to doom humanity. Johan Witt 1854 says, probably worth its own video. What are your plans? Wait, for divesting? I already copied this one. Final question. Torgator says, no, I already did that one. Did I come to the end and I just had some of these on here twice? I guess so. Okay, so that's the end of the questions. Thankfully, the silly one about the satellites was at the end. Overall, exiting 2023, going into 2024, at some point here in March or April, I guess, I'll hit the third year of YouTube, third year of Final Trade. Things are going great. It's growing. The Patreon program grew a ton this year. I was talking to my dad recently, and I said that when I first started the Patreon program, what I really expected from researching some other Patreon programs from different Magic channels was to get an uptake of about 0.5% of my YouTube subscribers to convert into patrons. And so at the time that I started the Patreon program in the summer of 2022, I want to say I had something like 800 subscribers on the channel. And so I suspected I might get 4 patrons. And very early on, I had, 15 or 20 take the offer in the first couple of months. That's grown really well, and it's grown out of proportion with the growth of the YouTube channel. And so now as the YouTube channel goes past 2,000 subscribers, I have something like 85 paying patrons. So it's somewhere on the order of 4% of my YouTube subscribers are patrons, which is, like I said, I expected 0.5%. So it's basically 8 times as high as I thought it would be. So, that puts a lot of pressure on me to feel like I'm really delivering $4 of value a month. And I know that sounds silly, but, I feel like I really need to deliver a lot more than $4 of value a month to patrons. So, I always try to be very quick when they message to give good, well thought out responses to questions and ideas that they have. I try to come up with a newsletter every month that really is interesting to me. And I think if it's interesting to me and it inspires me to spend enough time to think about it and really write it out as a good newsletter, then hopefully it's good enough for my patrons. So, I feel like my patrons and YouTube subscribers also have done so much for me. I don't feel like I've come anywhere close to paying it back, but hopefully in the long run, I can pay it back. And I can do as much for everyone out there as they've done for me, for Final Trade, for the Patreon program, and everything else so far. And I hope y'all keep coming along with me in the future. We'll see where it goes. Maybe one day we'll make it to a card store. Maybe not. Maybe we'll stay here at the desk for the long term, but we'll see. Let me know, guys. Thanks to everyone who makes this content possible, especially my generous supporters on Patreon. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join me on Final Trade.